The silver coin hit the counter and spun. It was not a ring. It was not a flower. It was a worn silver dollar, old enough that the eagle on its face had gone soft at the edges, and it rang once against the wood and went on spinning while the whole of Krebs Mercantile fell into a silence so complete that Ruth Ashby could hear the stove ticking in the corner. "Marry me," the stranger said. She looked at his boots first. Cracked across the left toe, resoled twice, the sole worn thin enough that she could see where a cobbler had given up on it. She looked at the fur-trimmed coat, greasy at the collar, mended at the elbow with a stitch no woman had put in. She looked at the dust still settling off his shoulders. Then she looked at his face. She did not know his name. She did not know where he had come from. All she knew was that her brother had 3 days left before Doc Shale stopped carrying his debt, and that this man was looking at her like he already knew what she was going to say. The coin was still turning on the counter when she found her voice. "I do not know you." He did not flinch. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and let the silence do whatever it was going to do to her. "No," he agreed. "You do not." "Then why would you ask?" "Because I need a wife." He said it the way a man states a fact he has already turned over 100 times before deciding to say it out loud. "And I think you need something too." Ruth looked around the store. Old Otto Krebs had stopped pretending to stock his shelves. Harriet Doyle and her sister were frozen by the window with their hands still on a bolt of gingham. Even the stock boy had put his head around the corner to stare. The whole town of Bitter Fork was watching. And Ruth Ashby had lived in Bitter Fork long enough to know that whatever happened in the next 30 seconds would be the only thing anyone talked about until the spring thaw. She picked up the coin. It was heavier than she expected, real silver, not a token, not a trinket. And it was worn smooth on both faces, the way a coin gets when a man has carried it in a pocket for 30 years and put his thumb to it more times than he could count. "One coin does not buy a wife," she said. "No," the stranger said. "It does not. But it tells you I am serious." He pushed his hat back off his forehead, and she saw his eyes for the first time. Dark, steady, patient. Not the eyes of a desperate man. Not the eyes of a fool. "My name is Micah Calder," he said. "I have a place north of here, back in the mountains. I can give you a home, food, safety, whatever your family needs." "My family," she said carefully. "Your brother." He said it gently, the way a man handles something he knows is fragile. "Wes, he has been at Doc Shale's for 2 weeks. The bill is past due." Her hand closed hard around the coin. "How do you know that?" "Small town," Micah Calder said. "People talk." She stared at him a long moment. He did not look away. He did not shift or fidget or try to fill the silence with more words. He simply waited. And that patience, that complete unhurried stillness, was somehow the most unsettling thing about him. "You are a trapper," she said. "You look like you can barely buy your own supper." Something moved behind his eyes. Not offense. Something quieter than that. He glanced down at his coat, at the worn elbows, at the boots, and then back up at her. "I have enough," he said. Harriet Doyle could not hold it any longer. "Ruth," she said from across the store, not even pretending she had not been listening. "Surely you are not actually considering." Ruth did not raise her voice. She did not turn around. "I do not recall asking you, Harriet." Harriet's mouth closed. Ruth looked back at Micah Calder. "Give me until tomorrow morning," she said. He nodded once, pulled his hat back down, and walked out of the mercantile without another word. The door swung shut behind him. And then every single person in that store began to talk at once. She did not sleep that night. She sat at the small table in the 2-room house she rented on the east side of town, the silver coin in front of her, her needle and thread untouched beside it. Through the thin wall she could hear Wes coughing. The same deep rattling cough that had started in September and had not stopped since. She was 26. She had been the head of this household since she was 19, since the fever took their mother and their father rode out that summer and never came back. 7 years of sewing until her fingers bled, of smiling at women who looked straight through her at church, of stretching $3 until it felt like 10. She had survived. She had kept Wes alive. She had done every single thing a person was supposed to do. And it still had not been enough. Doc Shale had been kinder than he needed to be. But he had his own accounts to settle, and 2 weeks of medicine and bed care cost real money. He had told her on Monday that he could not carry the debt past the end of the week. 4 days. She turned the coin over in her fingers. On one face, the standard stamping, on the other, the same. Nothing unusual about it at all except how worn it was, how much handling it had taken, as if it had been the most important object in somebody's life for a very long time. I have enough. She thought about the way he had looked at her. Not the way men in this town looked at her. Not like a problem to be pitied or an opportunity to be used. He had looked at her like she was a whole person. Like he was setting out terms and waiting to see whether she agreed. That, more than anything, was what kept her awake. At 4 a.m, Wes called out from the other room. Not in distress. Just restless, half awake, the way he got when the nights ran long. Ruthie, she went in and sat on the edge of his bed. He was 16 and looked 12. The fever had whittled him down to nothing over the past weeks, and lying there in the dark he looked so much like the small boy she had read to by candlelight that something ached under her ribs. "Why are you up?" he asked. "Thinking. About what?" She was quiet a moment. Then she said it. "A man came into the store today. He asked me to marry him." Wes went very still. "What kind of man?" "A trapper." "That is what he looks like, anyway." She turned the coin over once more. "He gave me this." Wes looked at it. His eyes widened. "That is a silver dollar." "I know." "Ruthie." "I know, Wes." He looked at her the way he had that always made her feel like he was the older one instead of 10 years younger. "What are you going to do?" Ruth closed her fingers around the coin. "I think," she said slowly, "that I am going to say yes." She found him the next morning at the edge of town, exactly where the north road began to climb toward the mountains. He was sitting on a fence post eating an apple. His horse was tied nearby, a big gray animal, unremarkable to look at, but Ruth noticed the quality of its hooves and the muscle in its hindquarters. Whatever else Micah Calder was, he knew horses. He saw her coming and stood up without hurrying. "I have conditions," Ruth said. He looked at her with what might have been the beginning of respect. "All right. My brother comes with me. Whatever arrangement you are offering covers him too. His medicine, his care, everything, until he is well." Agreed, she had expected an argument. His speed threw her off enough that she hesitated. "I want to know where we are going. I want to see what your home actually looks like before I commit to anything permanent." "That I cannot show you in advance," he said. "But you have my word that you will not be disappointed. Your word." She repeated it flatly. "I do not know you well enough to know what your word is worth." "No," he said. "Not yet." He met her eyes. "But you will." She studied him. The worn coat. The cracked boots. Nothing about him suggested anything beyond a hard season working land that gave back less than it took. And yet there was something in the way he stood that she could not name. A gravity. A quiet certainty that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with a man who knew exactly where he stood. "One more condition," she said. "Go ahead. This is a partnership, not a transaction." She held his gaze. "I am not agreeing to be furniture in somebody's house. If I come with you, I work. I contribute. I have a voice." For the first time since she had met him, Micah Calder smiled. It was small and brief, and it changed his face entirely. "Agreed," he said. "All three." She put out her hand. He shook it. Firm, direct, the handshake of a man who meant it. "When do we leave?" "Day after tomorrow. That gives you time to settle things here. She nodded and turned to go. Miss Ashby. She looked back. Thank you, he said. And he meant it. She could hear that he meant it. She did not answer. She walked back toward town with the silver coin in her pocket and the strange, unsettling feeling that she had just made either the smartest or the most foolish decision of her life, and that she genuinely could not tell which. The town made sure she knew its opinion. By that afternoon, word had run from one end of Bitter Fork to the other. Ruth Ashby was marrying the drifter, the quiet trapper who had been passing through for 3 weeks, the man who looked like he owned nothing but the shirt on his back. She heard it through the thin wall when Mrs. Garrity next door had her sister over for supper and did not trouble to lower her voice. That poor girl. Desperate is what she is. Can you blame her? Brother sick, no family, no prospects, but a trapper. No land, no money, no name. She is throwing herself away. Ruth sat at her sewing table and kept her hands moving. Thread in, needle through, thread out. The rhythm of it had kept her steady for 7 years. It kept her steady now. What she did not do was cry. She had cried when her mother died. She had cried when her father left. She had cried alone, in the dark, where no one could see. And then she had gotten up and gone back to work. She was done letting Bitter Fork watch her break. Harriet Doyle came to the house the next morning, came personally, which meant she considered this a serious enough emergency to leave her own kitchen before 10. Ruth, she sat down across the work table without being invited. I am going to speak frankly. When have you ever done otherwise? Harriet's mouth tightened. I know your position. I know about Wes and the money. But this man, nobody knows him. He rode in out of nowhere. He has nothing. You are going to spend your life working yourself to the bone for a man who cannot even afford new boots. Ruth kept sewing. He had a silver dollar. One coin does not make a man reliable. No, Ruth agreed. It does not. Then why? Because he looked me in the eye. She set down her needle and looked at Harriet directly. 7 years, Harriet. 7 years of me keeping this house standing and keeping Wes alive and doing every single thing right. How many men in this town have looked me in the eye and spoken to me like I was a whole person instead of a problem to feel sorry for? Harriet did not answer. He did, Ruth said. First conversation. 15 minutes. She picked her needle back up. Maybe that means nothing. Maybe I will get up there and find out he is a fool and I have made a terrible mistake. But I have made decisions on worse odds than that. Harriet stood, straightened her coat. I hope you know what you are doing. So do I, Ruth said quietly. 3 people came to see them off. Doc Shale, who shook Ruth's hand and told her that Wes's last 2 days of care were already settled. He showed her the receipt. A clean silver dollar, paid the previous afternoon. She looked at Micah. He said nothing. He only checked the straps on the harness. Otto Krebs from the mercantile, who pressed a paper package into her hands, thread, needles, a good small pair of scissors. He told her she was the best customer he had ever had, and that he hoped she found good land and good people wherever she was going. And Wes himself, bundled in his coat, still pale but standing on his own 2 feet for the first time in 2 weeks, who looked at Micah Calder for a long moment with that too sharp gaze of his. You will take care of her, Wes said. Micah looked at him with what seemed like genuine surprise, as if the question had come at him from a direction he had not expected. We will take care of each other, he said. Wes considered this. Then he gave a short nod, as if he had made a private judgment and it had come out in favor. Ruth helped her brother up into the wagon. Micah took the reins. And they rolled north out of Bitter Fork, while the town watched from behind curtains and doorframes, shaking its collective head at the poor foolish woman who had married a stranger with worn-out boots. Nobody waved goodbye. Micah did not look back. Neither did Ruth. The first day of travel was quiet. Wes slept in the wagon bed, worn out by the effort of getting up and moving. Ruth sat beside Micah and watched the country change. Flat street gave way to rolling grass. Grass gave way to heavy timber. The road narrowed. The mountains ahead of them grew. She had not been outside Bitter Fork in 4 years. She had forgotten how large the world was. After an hour of silence, she said, "Where did you grow up?" "Here," Micah said. "Montana, a different part of it." "Do you have family?" A brief pause. "Not anymore. I am sorry. Do not be." He said it without bitterness, without the hard edge that usually came with that answer. It was a long time ago. She tried another direction. "What did you do before you came to Bitter Fork?" He was quiet a moment. "Worked the mountains. Ran an outfit." "What kind of outfit?" He glanced at her sideways, the ghost of that small smile again. "You are curious. You asked me to marry you after 15 minutes of conversation," she said. "I think curiosity is appropriate." He laughed at that. A short, genuine sound. "Fair enough." He looked back at the road. Furs, mostly, trapping and trading. Some cattle. "Your outfit?" The pause was just a little too long. "An outfit," he said. She filed that away. She did not push. Not yet. But she began, that first afternoon, to notice things. She noticed how he handled the horses. Firm, confident, sure without being harsh. She noticed how he read the road, marking a soft patch 100 yards before they reached it and steering around it without comment. She noticed how his eyes moved constantly, cataloging the country with the practiced attention of a man who had spent a lifetime learning to read land. He was not performing competence. He simply had it. That evening they made camp at the edge of a creek. Micah had known it was there without checking. He had simply said, "We will stop in another mile." And a mile later there was the creek, exactly as though he had the map of this country written on the inside of his skull. Wes was awake by then, groggy but functional. He sat by the fire Micah built and ate the food Micah had packed. Real food, not trail hardtack. Actual bread, dried venison, a wedge of good cheese. And he watched Micah with those sharp 16-year-old eyes. "You know this country," Wes said. Micah stirred the fire. "Well enough. You have been through here before." "A few times." Wes chewed his bread. "The food is good, better than I expected." "That is a low bar," Micah said. Wes grinned, the first real grin Ruth had seen out of him in weeks. "You are all right," he pronounced, in the tone of a man delivering a verdict he considered important. Micah looked at him with an expression that was almost warm. "Get some sleep." Still 2 days to go. That night, after Wes had rolled back into his blankets and the fire had burned down to coals, Ruth sat in the quiet and listened to the creek, and tried to organize her thoughts into something she could work with. She was 3 hours north of everything she had ever known, heading deeper into mountains she had never been inside of, riding toward a home she had never seen, beside a man she had known for 2 days. She had either saved her brother's life or destroyed her own. She looked across the dying fire at Micah, who had his back to a tree and his hat down over his face. Asleep, or close to it. She thought about what Wes had said. "You are all right." Wes had good instincts. He always had. She held on to that and closed her eyes. On the second day, everything began to feel different. The road had narrowed to a trail, and the trail was walled on both sides by timber so dense and so old that traveling through it felt like moving down the aisle of a cathedral. The light came through at angles, green and gold and shifting. Twice they crossed bridges over fast streams. Ruth looked at those bridges. They were solid. Squared timber, properly notched, decked with planks that had been cut at a mill and not split by hand. They were maintained. Somebody had replaced a stringer on the second one within the last year, and the new wood was still pale against the old. Nobody built bridges like that on a wilderness track that supposedly led nowhere. She said nothing. An hour later, she saw the fence. It came and went through gaps in the timber, but she got enough of it to know what she was looking at. Long, straight, professionally set posts. Good wire, properly strained. Miles of it. That fence had cost more money than she had earned in her entire life. She said nothing about that either. But she noticed how Micah's shoulders had changed the deeper they went. Not tension, the opposite of tension, like a man who had been holding himself carefully in company for a long time and was now, mile by mile, allowing himself to settle. She noticed all of it. And on the afternoon of the second day, they stopped at the crest of a long ridge. Micah sat back on the reins and turned to look at her. "Before we go over," he said. Something in his voice stopped her cold. She turned to him. He was looking at her with an expression she could not read. Something between apprehension and resolve. The face of a man who has been carrying a weight a long time and is finally deciding whether to set it down. "What?" He was quiet a moment. "I need to tell you something before we get there." Her heart moved in a strange way. Not fear. Exactly. Alertness. "All right, I was not entirely honest with you in Bitter Fork." "About what?" He looked straight at her. "About what I have." The silence that followed was very specific, not empty. Full of the sound of wind in the pines and the horses shifting their weight and Wes turning over in the wagon bed behind them. "Micah," she kept her voice level. "What exactly am I about to see on the other side of this ridge?" He held her gaze. "My home," he said. "What it actually looks like." And he clicked the horses forward before she could say another word. She heard it before she saw it. Not the buildings, something else. The low, spread-out murmur of a large herd settling in for the evening. It came up out of the ground ahead of them, rich and heavy, and with it came the smell. Hay and earth and working animals and wood smoke, and underneath all of it something sharper and older that she would learn to recognize later as the smell of a curing shed full of pelts. Then they cleared the tree line at the lip of the ridge, and Ruth Ashby stopped breathing. Below them, filling a hidden valley between the mountains like something out of a story, lay the Calder place. She had expected, at best, a decent homestead. A proper cabin, a barn in fair repair. 30 or 40 head of cattle if he had been lucky in his season. What she saw was something else entirely. The valley floor ran green for 2 miles, impossibly green this late in the year, which meant irrigation, which meant ditches and headgates and years of somebody's labor. The fencing below was miles of it, perfectly maintained, running in straight lines she could follow until they disappeared into the timber. There were barns. 3 of them, enormous, their roofs sound and their walls plumb. And behind the barns, running along the creek in a long, low row, stood the sheds. 6 of them, high-vented roofs and wide doors, and racks of stretched hides drying in the last of the sun, hundreds of them, catching the light in a dozen shades of brown and silver and black. A fur operation, not a trapper's cabin with a few pelts nailed to the wall. The kind that bought from other trappers, that graded and cured and pressed and shipped, that dealt with buyers in St. Louis and Montreal and did it by the ton. And there, set back from the working buildings on a natural rise, stood the house. It was not a cabin. It was not even a large farmhouse. It was 2 full stories of cut stone and squared timber with a covered porch running the whole length of the front and windows that caught the evening light and threw it back like they had something to prove. It was the kind of house that took years to build and the kind of money most people in Montana Territory would never see. Ruth turned very slowly to look at Micah Calder. He was watching her face with an expression she had never seen on him before. Careful, vulnerable, waiting. "Who are you?" she said. His jaw moved. "The same man you agreed to marry. That is not a poor trapper's home." "No," he said quietly. "It is not." "Micah." Her voice was absolutely steady, though nothing inside her was steady at all. "I want the truth. Right now." Before we go 1 foot further." He looked at her a long moment. Then he set the brake, climbed down, and came around to her side of the wagon. He stood below her, looking up, and for the first time she saw something in his face that was not composure or patience or that careful stillness. He looked, underneath all of it, like a man who was genuinely and deeply afraid. "My father was Jonas Calder," he said. "He came into this valley 35 years ago with a horse, a rifle, and a hand axe. He built all of it. When he died 6 years back, it passed to me." He paused. "All of it. The land, the herd, the fur sheds, the buildings, the contracts. Everything you are looking at." The wind moved in the pines behind them. "Then, why," Ruth said, with great precision, "were you standing in Otto Krebs's mercantile in a coat with holes in the elbows, asking a seamstress to marry you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I have been looking for 3 years," he said, "for someone who would see me. Just me, without all of this in the way. And every single time I told the truth, all anyone could see was the valley." He held her gaze. "I needed to know," he said, "whether you would still choose me when there was nothing to gain." Ruth looked at him for a very long time. Then she looked down at the valley, at the house, at the barns and the drying racks and the miles of fence and the herd moving below like a slow, dark river. Then she looked back at him. "You lied to me," she said. "I never spoke a false word. You let me assume." Yes, he did not flinch from it. "I did. That is still a lie, Micah. A lie by omission is still a lie." He took it. He did not argue. He simply held the weight of it, the way a man does when he knows he has earned the thing being set on his shoulders. "Yes," he said. "You are right." Behind them, Wes had gone completely silent in the wagon. Ruth looked at the valley one more time. Everything she had left behind came back in a rush. The thin walls of the rented house. The 7 years of barely enough. The face Wes made when he thought she could not see him worrying about money. And then she thought about what she had actually agreed to. A partnership, not a transaction. "I have a voice." He had agreed to all of it. He had paid Wes's bill before she ever said yes. He had said, "We will take care of each other," to her sick brother without hesitating for a second. None of that changed because of what lay at the bottom of this ridge. But something else had changed, and she did not know yet what she was going to do with it. "Take us down," she said. He looked at her sharply. "I did not say I forgave you," she said. "I said take us down. I want to see what else you have not told me." Something moved across his face. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. The particular relief of a man who has been bracing for the worst and has been handed instead something more complicated. He climbed back up and took the reins. "There is not much else," he said. "I will decide that," Ruth said, and as the wagon rolled forward over the ridge and began the long descent into the hidden valley, with the evening light falling gold across the house and the barns and the endless drying racks below, Ruth Ashby sat with her hands folded in her lap and said nothing at all, and felt the whole shape of her life shifting under her like ground that had just revealed it was not as solid as she had believed. She was not afraid, but she was paying attention. And behind her, Wes Ashby, 16 years old and nobody's fool, looked out over that valley with wide eyes, and then looked at the back of Micah Calder's head, and smiled a small private smile that his sister never saw. Because Wes had known from the moment of that handshake outside Bitter Fork. From the quality of the food. From the bridges in the forest. From the way a man who claimed to own nothing sat a horse like he owned every acre under its feet. He had known something was different about this trapper. He simply had not known how different. Now he did. And he decided, privately, that he approved. The first man to meet them at the bottom of the ridge was named Elias Stark. He was somewhere past 60, with a white beard cropped close, and hands that looked like they had been carved from the same wood as the fence posts he spent his days mending. He came out of the main barn at a fast walk when he heard the wagon, and when he saw Micah on the bench his whole face changed. Not surprise. Something warmer than relief. The look of a man who had been waiting on something he was not entirely sure would come back. "Boss," he said. Ruth heard that word and went very still. Micah climbed down. "Elias, how is everything?" "Running smooth. Heard you might be back this week." Elias's eyes moved to Ruth. Quick, respectful, thorough, the look of a man who had spent decades reading people. "This her?" "This is Ruth," Micah said. "My wife." Elias took his hat off immediately. "Ma'am." He said it with real courtesy, the kind that is not performed but simply is. "Welcome to Calder Valley." Ruth looked at the men who had stopped working behind him. 5 she could see. More she could sense further back. All of them looking at Micah and then at her with the particular attention of people who had been waiting to see what their employer brought home. "Thank you," she said, and meant it, though her voice came out quieter than she intended. Wes appeared at the back of the wagon, and Elias's eyes went to him with immediate practical concern. "Boy needs the house," Elias said to Micah. "Not a question. He has been sick. He is on the mend. Ada will have a room ready inside of 20 minutes. He was already moving. I will send word." And that was that. The machine of a well-run outfit engaging without friction. And Ruth standing in the middle of it, understanding that this place had been running efficiently for years without her and would have gone right on running. That she was not needed here for survival the way she had assumed on the long ride north. She did not know yet whether that was better or worse. The inside of the house was worse than the outside, in the sense that it was more than she was prepared for. She had walked through the front door expecting a rich man's house. Cold, formal, all show and no warmth. What she found was a house lived in by people who worked for a living. Floors of good wood scuffed gray by boot traffic. Furniture that was solid and expensive the way functional things are expensive, not decorative ones. Books on the shelves stacked in among account ledgers and fur grading manuals. A stone fireplace that was big because it needed to be big. It was the house of a man who had money and spent it on things that mattered. Ada Stark, Elias's wife, a compact woman of about 55 with iron-gray hair and absolute authority over her domain, led Wes upstairs and had him fed and settled while Ruth was still standing in the front hall trying to reorganize her understanding of everything. Micah came in behind her and stopped at a distance that was respectful of the storm he knew was still sitting in her chest. "I can show you the house," he said, "if you want." She turned to face him fully. "How many people work here?" 26 full-time. More in the fall when the pelts come in. 26 people. A household. A community. And they had all known. "When you left for Bitter Fork," she said, "they knew who you were and what you were doing." He met her eyes. "Yes, did they know why?" "The disguise, the boots, all of it." A pause. "Elias knew. He has known me since I was 12. The others knew I had gone looking. Not the details. They called you boss just now." Her voice was precise, not accusing. Precise, the way a woman measures a seam before she cuts it. "They knew you were coming back with a wife. Ada had a room ready. I sent word 2 days ago from the last town." So he had known 2 days ago that she was coming. Had been certain enough to send word ahead. Had decided the outcome before she had finished deciding it herself. She sat with that. "You were very sure of me," she said. "No." He said it with a directness that stopped her. "I was hopeful. There is a difference." She looked at him. "If you had said no at that fence post," he said, "I would have walked away. I would not have pushed. I would not have tried to change your mind with any of this." He made a small gesture at the house around them, a gesture that managed somehow to be dismissive about a mansion. I have had a woman change her mind when she saw this valley. That is not something I wanted again. Ruth went very quiet. Again, she said. He held her gaze, steady. Her name was Louisa Brand. 3 years ago. We met in Bozeman. I was honest with her from the beginning, told her who I was and what I had. Brought her out here. He paused. She left 4 months later. Said she could not stand the isolation, that the valley felt like a prison. Another pause, smaller, that I felt like a prison. The house was very quiet around them. I am sorry, Ruth said, and meant it. I learned something from it. He looked at his hands, then back at her. I learned that what I have here is not what everyone wants, and I learned that I did not want to go through that again with someone who was in love with the idea of the valley instead of anything real. And Ruth understood then what the worn coat and the cracked boots and the silver dollar on a counter had actually been. Not deception, not manipulation, fear, the particular fear of a man who had been chosen for his wealth and left for his solitude, and had decided he would rather be chosen for nothing and found worthy than chosen for everything, and found lacking. She still thought he had handled it wrong, but she understood it now. I am not Louisa Brand, she said. No, you are not. And I am not in love with your valley, I know, but I am angry with you. She said it evenly. That is still true, and it is going to take time before it is not. He nodded. That is fair. Then we understand each other, Ruth said. Now show me the house. It took an hour because she asked questions about everything and he answered all of them. Who had cut the fireplace stone? Which year the east wing went up, what the small room off the kitchen had been before it became storage, and whether it could be something else now. That last one made him stop. What would you use it for? A workroom. I sew. I need light and a table where I can spread material out without somebody walking through it. He looked at the room. She watched him calculate. Windows, light, direction, traffic. We would have to move 12 years of badly organized storage, he said. I have organized worse things than storage. He looked at her with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was in the same country as one. I expect you have. At the end of the tour they stood on the back porch, long and covered, looking out over the valley in the last of the light. The coin, Ruth said. Micah went still. She took it out of her pocket. It sat in her palm, worn smooth on both faces. You said one coin does not buy a wife, but it tells me you are serious. Why this coin? A man with 26 people on his payroll could have put $100 on that counter. He was quiet for a long moment. My father could not read, he said. She looked up at him. Not one word. He came into this country with nothing, and he built every acre of it on handshakes, because a handshake was all he had to give and all he could understand. Micah looked out at the darkening valley. When he bought land off a man, he could not sign a paper, so he made his own way of doing it. He would shake the man's hand, and then he would take 2 silver dollars out of his pocket. He would give one to the seller and keep one himself. Same date, same mint, always a matched pair. And he would say, "This is my mark and that is yours, and as long as those 2 coins are in the world, the deal stands." Ruth looked down at the coin in her hand. He did that his whole life, Micah said. Every purchase, every agreement. There are coins from Jonas Calders sitting in kitchen drawers in 5 counties. He paused. That one was his. He carried it 35 years. It is the only thing of his I have left. The porch was very quiet. And you put it down on a counter, Ruth said slowly, in front of a woman you had known for 15 minutes. Yes, why? Micah Calder looked at her. Because it was the most valuable thing I owned, he said. And I wanted you to know I was not playing a game. She asked to see the books on the 3rd morning. Micah blinked at her across the breakfast table. The books. If I am going to understand this place, I need to understand what it costs to run, and where the money goes, and whether the numbers make sense. She set down her cup. "Show me the ledgers." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that reminded her strangely of the first time she had told him she had conditions. "Nobody has ever asked to see the books before," he said. "Well, now somebody is." They spent 2 hours in the study with the ledgers spread across the desk, and what Ruth found surprised her. Not because the numbers were bad, because they were good in ways that were unusual. The men earned fair wages, meaningfully above what most outfits in the territory paid. The valley spent heavily on maintenance, on medicine, on winter stores, and there were regular quarterly payments to 4 neighboring families, logged simply as agreements, with no further explanation. "What are these?" Ruth said. Micah looked at the entries. His expression shifted into something careful. "Old commitments. My father made arrangements with families when he was buying out the valley. They let him have land they had been working. In exchange, he promised quarterly payments as long as the outfit ran. Are they still farming?" "Some. The Gaines have their own spread on the east side. The Malone widow, her husband sold to my father, and she has been on those payments for 14 years now." Ruth looked at the consistency of the numbers. Year after year after year. "You have honored these every quarter." "They were promised," he said, as though this were self-evident. "Most men would have found legal grounds to end them the moment the land transferred." He said nothing. "Your father made these promises," she said. "Not you. You could have walked away from them." "They were promised," he said again. Ruth looked down at 14 years of quarterly payments to a widow who had sold her husband's land and received nothing in return but a handshake and a coin. She was still angry with him. But she was beginning to understand the shape of this man's character, which was not the shape of his fortune, and those were 2 very different things. The first test came on the 9th day, and it came from nowhere visible, which was the way the real ones always came. A man rode in from the South Road at mid-morning wearing good clothes and an expression that Ruth, even from across the yard, identified immediately as the expression of a man who is very pleased about something he has not yet revealed. Elias appeared beside her before the rider had dismounted. "Ambrose Kettering," he said quietly, "Cascade Fur and Trading. He has been sniffing at the south boundary for 2 months. What does he want?" "The valley." Elias's voice was flat. "He has wanted it for 10 years. What stopped him?" "Micah," Elias said simply. Kettering dismounted with the ease of a man who intends to make himself comfortable in a space that is not his. 50 or so, well-fed, with the kind of silver-templed handsomeness that is assembled rather than arrived at. He looked around the yard with a proprietary interest that made Ruth's skin prickle. Then his eyes found her, and something changed in his face. A recalculation. "Mrs. Calder," he crossed toward her with a smile that showed teeth. "I had heard Micah finally got himself a wife. I did not believe it." "Mr. Kettering, is he about?" "I will let him know you are here," she said. She did not move immediately. She let 1 moment pass. Just one. Just enough to establish that she was not going to move on his timing. Then she went inside to find Micah. She watched the meeting from the study window. She could not hear it through the glass, but she could read the posture. Micah still, arms loose at his sides. Kettering expansive, talking with his hands, the body language of a man making an offer. Micah's whole frame said no before Kettering had finished speaking. Kettering's smile did not waver. He reached into his coat and produced a paper. He held it out. Micah looked at it but did not take it. Then Micah said something, and whatever it was, Kettering's smile did something small and complex. Not disappearing. Adjusting, tightening at the edges. Becoming the smile of a man who has shifted from offering to threatening without letting the surface change. He put the paper back in his coat. He tipped his hat. He rode south. Micah came inside and directly to the study and did not tell her she should not have been watching. "Well," she said. He sat down, stared at the desk. "He has made a claim on the South Range. 1,200 acres, the creek, and the whole West Timber run where my father's best trap lines are." He was quiet. "He says my father's original purchase from Gerald Doyle was never lawfully made, that there is no deed, that Doyle sold the same ground to Kettering's father in '71, and there is a paper to prove it." Ruth pulled up a chair and sat down across the desk from him. "Is there a deed?" Micah looked at her. "No," he said. "My father could not read or write. He bought that ground the way he bought everything, a handshake and a coin." The room was very quiet. "So there is nothing," Ruth said. "There is 30 years of us working it and nobody once saying a word about it. That is all." He rubbed his face. "And a piece of paper in Ambrose Kettering's coat with Gerald Doyle's signature on it." "Gerald Doyle," Ruth said slowly, "of Bitter Fork." Micah looked up. "Harriet Doyle's husband," Ruth said. "He has been dead 8 years. They came at night, 9 days later." Ruth woke to the sound of the dogs and then to the sound of Elias Stark hammering on the front door with the flat of his hand and shouting a word she had never heard him shout. Fire. The number 2 curing shed went up like a torch. 4,000 pelts. 2 seasons of buying. Ruth stood in the yard in her nightdress with a bucket in her hands and watched 26 people fight that fire for 3 hours in the freezing dark. They saved the sheds on either side. They saved the barns. That was all they saved. By dawn there was nothing left of number 2 but a black rectangle in the snow and a smell that got into her clothes and stayed a week. Micah walked the burn line at first light with Elias. Ruth walked it with them. "Lamp oil," Elias said. He crouched and put his fingers in the ash and smelled them. "Poured along the north wall. Whoever did it walked in from the timber and walked back out." He stood up. "That was not an accident, boss." Micah said nothing for a long moment. He was looking at the black ground where 2 years of work had been. "How much?" Ruth said. "In pelts?" Elias exhaled. "Better part of $9,000. And the buyers in St. Louis," Micah said quietly, "are expecting delivery in March." Ruth looked at the ruin, and then at the timber where a man had walked in with a can of oil, and something inside her went very cold and very clear. "He is not trying to win a land claim," she said. Both men looked at her. "He is trying to break you before the claim is ever heard," she said. "He wants you cash poor and shipping short so that when the hearing comes you are already halfway to selling." She turned to Micah. "He is going to do it again." He did it again 11 days later. They found the cattle in the North Meadow. 32 head. Dead around a stock trough that somebody had emptied a sack of white arsenic into. The snow was tracked with the marks of animals that had gone down slowly and got back up and gone down again. Wes was the one who found them. He was 16 years old and he came back to the house white as the snow, and he did not say anything at all for 2 hours. Micah stood in that meadow for a long time. Then he walked back to the house and took his rifle down off the wall, and Ruth stepped in front of the door. "No," she said. "Ruth, you go down there with that rifle and you give him exactly what he has been trying to buy for 2 months. Her voice did not rise. It did not have to. He has a lawyer in Helena and a paper with a dead man's name on it. What he does not have is a reason for anyone to think you are a dangerous man. Do not hand him one." Micah stood in the hallway with the rifle in his hands and his jaw working. 32 head, he said. "And Wes had to find them." "I know. Then what do I do?" And Ruth Ashby, who had spent 7 years solving problems that could not be wished away and could not be waited out, looked at her husband and said the things she had been turning over since the night of the fire. "You put the rifle back," she said, "and we go to Bitter Fork. And we go and see Harriet Doyle. Harriet Doyle's house sat behind the church on the west side of Bitter Fork, and she opened the door to them with a face that did three things in rapid sequence: surprise, defensiveness, and then something harder to name. Something that looked briefly like a woman who has been waiting a very long time for somebody to come and ask her a question that has been sitting in her chest. Ruth. Harriet. A pause. May we come in? The hesitation went on longer than was comfortable. Then Harriet stepped back from the door. They sat in the front parlor. Harriet did not offer tea. I heard you were still up there, she said. At his valley. She put a specific weight on the last two words. Not quite mockery. The punctuation a person uses when they feel they were right about something and are deciding whether to say so. We are, Ruth said. And we have come because we need to talk about Gerald. Harriet went very still. My husband has been dead 8 years. I know. And I am sorry for it. I mean that. Ruth held the older woman's gaze, but before he died, a man named Ambrose Kettering says Gerald signed a paper. A deed selling the south range of Calder Valley to Kettering's father back in 71. Something moved across Harriet's face, complicated and fast and not entirely readable. Who told you about that? Kettering showed it to Micah 2 months ago, Ruth said. He is using it to take 1,200 acres. Harriet's mouth tightened. She looked at Micah for the first time since they had sat down. Mr. Calder, Mrs. Doyle, quiet, direct, respectful. Your father was a fair man, Harriet said abruptly. Micah blinked. Yes, he was. Gerald respected him. She turned the words over, deciding which ones to keep. Gerald sold him the South Range. That is true. In 69, 2 years before Kettering's father ever set foot in this country. The parlor was very quiet. But there is no deed, Ruth said carefully. Jonas Calder could not write. No, Harriet said. He could not. And then Harriet Doyle stood up and crossed the room and opened the drawer of a small side table by the window and took something out of it, and came back and set it down on the table between them. A silver dollar, worn smooth on both faces. Ruth reached into her pocket and set her own beside it. The 2 coins lay there on Harriet Doyle's parlor table, and they were the same. Same year, same mint, worn to the same softness by 2 different men who had carried them in 2 different pockets for the rest of their lives. Nobody said anything for a long moment. He gave that to Gerald in the fall of 69, Harriet said. Her voice had gone very steady. In this house. At this table. He shook Gerald's hand and he put that coin down and he said, This is my mark and that is yours, and as long as those 2 coins are in the world, the deal stands. She looked up. Gerald told me that story every year of our marriage. He was proud of it. He said it was the only contract he ever signed that he never once had cause to doubt. Ruth's heart was doing something fast and focused. Harriet, she said. The paper Kettering has, it carries Gerald's signature. Harriet Doyle looked at her with an expression Ruth had never once seen on that woman's face in 26 years. Gerald could not write either, she said. He made his mark. An X. And a witness beside it. Every paper he ever put his name to in this life carries an X. The room went absolutely silent. Any document with Gerald Doyle's signature written out in a fair hand, Harriet said, is a forgery, and I will say so to any judge in this territory who asks me. Ruth sat back very slowly. Would you say it in Helena? Harriet looked at the 2 coins on her table for a long moment. Ambrose Kettering, she said, sent a man to this house 4 months after Gerald died. Said he was gathering historical records of early land sales. Said he wanted to pay his respects. Her eyes were very bright. I let him in. I gave him coffee. I let him go through Gerald's papers with me, because I could not bear to do it alone. She looked up. Yes, she said. I will say it in Helena. They left before dark. because the weather was turning and Micah wanted the pass before the snow closed it. He did not get the pass. It came down on them 2 hours north of Bitter Fork, in the narrow cut where the road ran between the rock and the drop, and it came down hard and white and blinding, and Ruth felt the wagon slow, and then she felt Micah's hand close on her arm. "Get down in the bed," he said. "Now, what?" "There is a man in the rocks above us." The first shot went through the canvas 18 inches over her head. What happened next took under a minute, and Ruth carried the pieces of it the rest of her life. Micah swinging down off the bench with the horses screaming. The second shot punching through the sideboard. His arm across her, shoving her flat into the bed, and the wet heat soaking through her sleeve that had come from him and not from her. And then the sound of a horse going away fast through the timber, and the snow coming down, and the terrible quiet. He had been hit high in the left shoulder. It had gone through. She packed the wound with her own petticoat, and she took the reins herself, and she drove that team through a whiteout for 4 hours on a road she had traveled exactly twice. And she did not stop, and she did not turn back, and she did not cry. Elias Stark was at the gate when the wagon came in. He looked at the blood in the wagon bed, and he looked at Ruth's face, and he did not say a single word. He simply started giving orders. Micah Calder did not wake up for 2 days. When he did, Ruth was in the chair beside the bed with her hands folded and her eyes red-rimmed and absolutely dry. He looked at her for a while. "Ruth, do not talk. He shot at you." "He shot at us," she said. "And he missed me because you put your arm in the way." Micah was quiet. "There is something I want to say," he said. "Then say it." "I have been alone in this valley for 6 years," he said. His voice was thin, but it was steady, and I told myself it was because I could not find the right person. That was not the truth. The truth is that I was afraid of exactly this, of caring about something so much that a man like Kettering could use it against me. He looked at the ceiling. And now he has. And I find that I do not regret it. Not 1 hour of it. Ruth sat very still. "I love you," Micah said. "I know it is soon. I know I have not earned it. I am telling you anyway because I have spent 2 days lying here thinking about the fact that I nearly did not get the chance." The room was quiet a long time. "It is soon," Ruth said. "I know. But I am closer than I was a month ago." She reached over and put her hand on his. "And a month ago I was closer than the day I met you." She held his gaze. "That is not nothing." "No," he said quietly. "That is not nothing." The lawyer's name was Henry Loomis, and he came up from Helena in the second week and sat in the study with the 2 coins in front of him for a very long time. "A judge will admit these," he said at last. "But I want you to understand what they are. They are corroboration. They are not a deed." He looked up. "Kettering has a document. We have 2 coins and a widow. If Mrs. Doyle holds firm on the mark, we win. If she falters on that stand, we lose the South Range, the creek, and the West Timber." "She will not falter," Ruth said. "You are certain?" "I have known that woman my whole life," Ruth said. "She has never once softened for anybody in her life, and she is not going to start for Ambrose Kettering." Loomis went back to Helena to file. And the valley went into the dark month. Because Kettering was not finished. The fire and the cattle had only been the opening. 2 St. Louis buyers canceled in January, and Ruth found out why when a letter came back, polite and regretful, saying the man had heard the Calder title was in dispute and his house could not accept furs against contested ground. Kettering had written to every buyer Micah had. By February, the outfit had lost $9,000 in pelts, 32 head of cattle, and 2/3 of its market. Ruth found Micah in the study at midnight with the ledger open in front of him and his good hand flat on the page. "He has offered again," he said, without looking up. "Through Loomis, he will drop the claim and buy the whole valley outright. It is a low number, but it is a number. You are not going to take it." Ruth. He looked up at her, and she saw the thing she had never seen in him before, not on the ridge, not in the burned shed, not with a bullet through his shoulder. 26 people work here. If I fight this and lose, I lose everything, and they lose everything with me. And Wes loses whatever future I have been promising him in that barn for 4 months. If I sell now, everybody walks away with something. He closed the ledger. I have been sitting here all night doing the arithmetic, he said. And every way I run it, selling is the responsible thing. Ruth stood in the doorway a moment. Then she came to the desk, and she took the silver dollar out of her pocket and set it down on the ledger in front of him. It rang once against the leather and lay still. Micah looked at it. You put this in front of me, Ruth said, when I had nothing. When I had a sick brother and 4 days and $11 in a town that had already decided what I was worth. Her voice was perfectly level. And you did not know if I would say yes. And you put it down anyway. He did not move. We still have nothing, she said. That is the truth of it. We have 2 coins and a widow and a man who tried to shoot you in a snowstorm. She put her finger on the coin. And I am still saying yes. The lamp hissed. Your father built this valley on a handshake he could not read, Ruth said. Do not you dare be the Calder who signs it away because the arithmetic was hard. Micah Calder looked at the coin on the ledger for a very long time. Then he picked it up and closed his hand around it. All right, he said. The courtroom in Helena was full. Ruth had expected a small procedural room. What she found was a gallery packed with people who had apparently decided that the Calder land case was worth seeing in person. Because the Helena Sentinel had run 3 pieces on it in 10 days, and the last one had carried the words "Fur Baron accused of arson" above the fold. Ambrose Kettering sat with his lawyer, a smooth Chicago man named Julian Frost, and his face was composed. But it was the composure of a man working very hard at something. Frost was good. He put the deed in front of the judge with the quiet authority of a man handling evidence he knows is real. He walked through the chain of title. He described Jonas Calder as an illiterate squatter who had occupied ground he never owned, and Micah as his heir in error, and he did it without ever once raising his voice. Then Loomis called Harriet Doyle. She walked to that chair in her good black dress, the one she had worn to Gerald's funeral, and she sat down and folded her hands, and Ruth watched Julian Frost look at her and make the calculation that every man had been making about Harriet Doyle for 40 years, which was that she could be handled. Mrs. Doyle, Frost said gently, you are asking this court to believe that a document bearing your husband's signature is a forgery. On what basis? On the basis that my husband could not write his name. The gallery stirred. You are certain of that? Mr. Frost, Harriet Doyle looked at him with an expression that could have stripped paint. I was married to Gerald Doyle for 31 years. I signed his letters. I read him his own mail. He made an X, and I witnessed it, and there is not one document in this territory with his handwritten name on it that he did not have help forging. Frost paused. It was a very small pause. Memory over 8 years is imperfect. Then produce another paper, Harriet said. Any paper. Any single document from any year of Gerald Doyle's life that carries a written signature. And I will sit down and say nothing more. Frost did not produce one. Because there was not one. Loomis put the 2 coins on the bench. He put Elias Stark on the stand, who had been 12 years old in Bitter Fork in '69, and remembered the day Jonas Calder came out of the Doyle house grinning. He put the Malone widow on the stand, who took a matched silver dollar out of her own purse and laid it on the rail, and said, in a voice that shook and did not stop, that Jonas Calder had put it in her hand the year her husband died, and that the payments had never once missed a quarter in 14 years. And then Loomis called the man Kettering had sent to the Doyle house. His name was Corbin Vale. He had been arrested in Bozeman 9 days earlier on an unrelated charge, and he had, when the Helena Sentinel published the word arson, decided very quickly that he did not intend to hang alone. He testified for 40 minutes. Ambrose Kettering did not look at anyone at all. The judge took an hour. He found for the respondent on every contested acre. He confirmed the Calder South Range, the creek, and the West Timber as lawfully purchased in the fall of 1869. He dismissed the deed. And then he referred the forgery, the fire, and the shooting in the past to the territorial attorney, and he did it while looking directly at Ambrose Kettering, and the gavel came down. The gallery let out a sound like a held breath released. Micah Calder sat very still for one moment. Then Ruth felt his hand close over hers on the table. She turned to look at him. And his face was doing something she had never seen it do. Not the almost smile. Not the careful steadiness. The face of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just been told he can set it down. They came home to the valley on the third day. The gate was open when they rode in, because Wes had been watching the road, and Elias had gone to open it with the unhurried dignity of a man who was not going to run anywhere and was not going to pretend he had. The St. Louis buyers came back before the thaw. The cattle were replaced by summer. Number 2 shed was rebuilt in June, and it went up straighter than the one that burned. Ruth Calder took the east room on the second floor, the one with 3 windows. The one that had been Jonas Calder's and had stood empty 6 years because Micah could never decide what it was for. She put a long table in it and good light, and she took in work from Helena, and by the end of that year she was employing 2 women out of Bitter Fork. And in the fall, when the pelts came in and the buyers paid out and the year closed black in every column, Micah Calder came to find his wife in that east room at dusk. He put something on the table in front of her. 2 silver dollars. Matched, same year, same mint. New, bright, unworn, I had them struck, he said. For the gains. Their old ones are worn out, and the agreement has another 30 years to run. Ruth looked at them for a long moment. Then she looked up at him. Your father could not read, she said. And he built all of this on a handshake anyway. Because he understood the only thing that has ever actually held anything together. And what is that? That a promise is only worth as much as the person who keeps it, Ruth said. The paper never mattered. The coin never mattered. She picked one up and turned it in the light. It was always just a way of saying, I will be the same man tomorrow that I am today. Micah Calder looked at her across the table. He would have liked you, he said. Ruth smiled, and downstairs the house was full of the sound of it. 26 people and a boy of 17 who could now ride a trap line in the dark and never lose his way, in a hidden valley behind the mountains that no man with a lawyer and a forged paper had been able to take. They had said she married a poor man. They had been right. He simply had not been poor in any of the ways that Bitter Fork knew how to count.